One of the first things we need to do as we work on constructing our new database is establish our data source. We're not going to get into how to work with SQL or MySQL or Oracle, but we are going to recommend that most of your web applications work with a SQL backend. You can work with DBFs, which are the native tables for Alpha 5, but for various reasons, SQL databases are generally recommended for web applications. That includes their speed and their security as well. So what we'll be doing here is we'll be working with a SQL database, and you need to first make your connection to your backend SQL database or databases. You can have just as many as you need to feed your web application. Most people just work with one, but you can have multiple if you need to. So let's see how we can do that. We'll start from the desktop control panel here and go up to Tools, and let's see, we'll pick External Databases. We want the alpha DAO connection strings. Whenever I provide this instruction, some people mistakenly pick ADO connection strings, which are a slightly older method. So I want to emphasize that you want to start with the alpha DAO connection string. And what we'll do is we're going to connect it to our backend data source, and then be able to reuse that connection over and over again. So we'll go to our new string here, and we'll call this Alpha Sports. There are a couple of databases, there are access databases that come with your Alpha 5 installation, and that's where we're headed with this. One of them is the Alpha Sports database that has been typically packaged with Alpha 5 over the years. They've moved that into an access database format. And the other one is the North Winds database that typically comes with access. What's important is that the connection to them is a connection to a SQL backend. And once you have that SQL connection, then most everything else that you do with Alpha 5 is just Alpha 5. It doesn't really care what or how that data is coming from, as long as the connection is to a good backend. So let's go ahead and build the connection string. And you can see all of the various databases that Alpha 5 can connect to and use as its data source. And as I've noted, and as some of the people at Alpha Software have termed this, Alpha 5 is fairly agnostic about where its data comes from, and they provided these tools for us to work with. So we'll pick an access type database, because that's what we all have, and I wanted to pick something that everybody can work with here. And then we'll go to the file name. Now, I've installed my Alpha 5 on the root drive of the root of the C drive. Most of you will have yours in your program files. So what you want to do is you want to get into your Alpha 5 version 11 program files. And within that folder, you'll find an MDB files folder. That's for Microsoft database files. And in there, you'll find both the Northwind database and the Alpha Sports database that I was just describing. And we'll be working with this series with the Alpha Sports database. Let's bring that within the window here. And I happen to know that the user of admin and all the rest of the defaults here are perfectly fine. As you're connecting to other backends and other databases, you get slightly different views here and different options to fill in. And you may, if you're not already the database administrator, you'll need to be in touch with your administrator to get the correct connections. So you can test your connection, and you should get a succeeded message like this. And then you can click OK. And you can see that the connection string has now been built. We'll be making use of this connection string much later on when we actually make this available on the web. But this is your starting point to have it available for your development environment. So we can click OK. And as I noted, any one database can connect to lots of different backends if you need to. But we'll just do the one for now. That's all we really need. So we can close this. Once we've made this connection, there are a couple of things that are useful to explore. Let's go back to Tools and External Databases. And let's start with the Database Explorer at the top of this list here. So here's the Database Explorer. If we go to Local Tables, you'll see that this is empty because there are no DBFs associated with this database yet. But we can also add in our database from the name connection string. So we'll use our name connection string of Alpha Sports and click OK. And now we have the Alpha Sports tables available and any of the other parts. If there are views in here, for instance, there's one view and there are some tables. So you can click on the customer table. You can see the various fields that are there. You can right click and show the data in a column. You can right click on the customer table, count the rows, show the data in the table. Go ahead and fool around with it a little bit. Get yourself familiar with what's here. And being familiar with your database, of course, is very helpful in building it, because then you'll know where you want to go. And this gives us a clue as to what we'll be building here with this training series, that we have customers, we have products, we have invoices, salespeople, and vendors. So you can see that we're going to create a basic sales, customer, and vendor information system here with this current training series here, with this total training series. There may be times when you have added tables. In fact, that's pretty typical. Or added some fields to any one table, or some views. And this view here, this Database Explorer, may not show everything that's there. So you can always refresh what the Database Explorer shows by refreshing itself with this circular arrow here. And that refreshes the Explorer with the contents of what's actually in the database. While we're here, we should also go to Tools and External Databases and go to the SQL Query Genie. The SQL Query Genie is very similar to what's used later on as we construct some of the data. So let's take a look at that. And let's go ahead and experiment with this just a little bit. Again, once you see, it doesn't fit in my recording window completely, but we can still get by with most of it pretty well here. The SQL Query Genie, if you already know how to create a select statement or an insert statement or something, then you're well ahead. But even if you do, then this is still very helpful to work with. So let's do something very simple here just to get you familiar with Alpha 5's tools. You can add a table, and let's just add a customer table to this. And you can see that our select statement is being written for us here to select everything from customer. So we could execute the query, and we get our 62 records in here. But we could also say that we only want a few columns. So let's just say that we want the customer ID, the first name, the last name, and let's go ahead and pick the bill city as well in here, and the bill state region, and then execute the query again. You can go to the filter builder here and say that you want only where the bill state region is equal to, I'll just slide our window over a bit here. We can say Massachusetts, for instance. Here's one of the instances of something that I'd like to point out with Alpha 5 and most any designer, but you want to pay particular attention to it here. If I just type in MA here and don't move my cursor out of this control, then Alpha doesn't know, this designer doesn't know that you've actually changed the value in this. It's not until you've actually moved your cursor out of the control that it knows what value you actually mean to put in here. So I'll just use my tab key, for instance, and you can see that it completes itself by putting the single quote marks around it. And this little piece of, this little tip that I just described here, of making sure that you leave the control so that Alpha knows that you've now changed the value and what the value is very important throughout your Alpha designing experience here. So now we've said that we want where the bill state region is equal to Massachusetts, so we can execute the query and we get just the records that are in Massachusetts down here. We also have our select statement written for us, and this can be used in lots of other places as you start to build your application. So I brought you through the SQL Query Genie here for a couple of reasons. One is to start getting you familiar with how you can work with Alpha 5 and its point and click and pick from lists and select options here. We didn't have to do any coding. We didn't have to sit and write the select statement. But also because the SQL Query Genie is a very important tool and a very powerful tool for a lot of reasons. And you'll be working with this particular piece quite a bit as you build your grids and some other pieces later on in your web application. So that gets you started with the things that we need to see with the desktop side here. Well, as I noted, we'll be coming back to this later on when we talk about reports especially, and probably talk just a little bit about code near the end of the tutorial series here, so that you understand how to work with that a little bit. But from here on, let's get ourselves started now with the Web Projects control panel in the next recording.